The federal courthouse in Bakersfield, California, stood as a modest beacon of justice amid the sprawling oil fields and dusty farmland of the Central Valley. On a crisp December morning, its squat, concrete facade was dwarfed by the swarm of activity outside. News vans lined the cracked asphalt parking lot, their satellite dishes tilting toward the sky, while a throng of protesters jostled for space along the curb. Some wave signs reading "McCarthy must fall" in bold black marker. Others countered with "Kevin fights for us," scrawled in red, white, and blue. Inside, Room 3 buzzed with a restless energy reporters crammed the gallery, their laptops glowing with live feeds. Political aides whispered into phones, their faces etched with worry, and onlookers craned their necks, drawn by the promise of a political showdown that could reshape the region's future. At the center of this maelstrom sat Kevin McCarthy, the former House Speaker and longtime representative of California's 20th Congressional District. At 58, his boyish features had hardened with the years, his sandy hair thinning but still combed with care. He wore a tailored navy suit, his posture stiff but confident, exuding the air of a man who'd weathered countless storms until now. McCarthy faced a federal lawsuit accusing him of misusing his congressional influence to secure lucrative contracts for a local energy firm, Kern Energy Solutions, in exchange for unreported campaign funds and personal perks. The allegations had surfaced weeks after his historic ouster as Speaker in October 2023, a wound still fresh when he'd announced his resignation from Congress in December. Now, dragged back into the spotlight, he dismissed the charges as baseless revenge from political enemies, but the stakes were higher than ever. The room hushed as the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise for the Honorable Judge Elena Martinez. A petite woman in her early 60s strode in, her black robe flowing behind her like a shadow. Judge Elena Martinez was a Bakersfield native with deep roots in the community, her dark eyes sharp and her gray-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Known for her fiery temper and unrelenting pursuit of justice, she'd earned a reputation as a judge who brooked no nonsense, especially from the powerful. Her tenure on the federal bench had been marked by high-profile cases, from corporate fraud to civil rights disputes, and her disdain for political gamesmanship was well documented. Today, she carried an air of quiet menace, her gaze sweeping the courtroom before settling briefly on McCarthy. Martinez took her seat, adjusting a stack of files with deliberate precision. "This is a court of law, not a campaign rally," she said, her voice cutting through the silence with a crisp, authoritative edge. "I expect evidence, not excuses. Let's get started." McCarthy's expression remained steady, though a flicker of unease passed through his blue eyes. Beside him sat Richard Hayes, his defense attorney, a seasoned litigator with a silver tongue and a knack for turning lost causes into victories. Across the aisle stood Sandra Lopez, the prosecutor, a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's office, her dark suit sharp and her demeanor unshakable. Lopez had spent months building a case that promised to unravel McCarthy's carefully crafted image, and she was ready to strike. The gallery shifted, a collective breath held as the trial began. Outside, the wind whipped through the Central Valley, rattling the courthouse windows, but inside, the real tempest was about to break. The courtroom lights cast long shadows as Sandra Lopez rose from her seat, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Her opening statement was her chance to seize the narrative, to paint a picture of corruption so stark the jury couldn't ignore it. She faced the 12 jurors, farmers, teachers, and retirees from Kern County, and began, her voice clear and commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about accountability. Kevin McCarthy, a man who wielded immense power as House Speaker, abused that influence to line his pockets and bolster his campaigns. He struck a secret deal with Kern Energy Solutions, a local firm desperate for federal contracts. In exchange for $3 million in unreported funds and personal perks like a private jet for his family's UZ pressure government agencies to award Kern Energy millions in drilling permits. This wasn't an oversight. It was a betrayal of the public trust, and we'll prove it." Lopez paused, letting her words sink in. The jurors sat rapt, some scribbling notes, others staring at McCarthy, whose face remained impassive. You'll see bank records, hear from witnesses who sat in those backroom meetings, and review emails that show Mr. McCarthy's hands deep in this scheme, she continued. He hid behind his title while breaking the law, and today, he faces the consequences. As Lopez sat, Richard Hayes stood, his movements smooth and deliberate. He adjusted his cufflinks and offered the jury a disarming smile, his voice warm and steady. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is a fairy tale political hit job dressed up as justice. Kevin McCarthy has served this district for nearly 2 decades, fighting for jobs, farms, and families. He trusted his staff and allies to handle campaign details, and if mistakes were made, they weren't his. This lawsuit is revenge, pure and simple, from opponents who couldn't beat him at the ballot box or in Congress. They've dragged him here with flimsy evidence and wild accusations, but they won't prove he broke the law because he didn't. Hayes paced slowly, his hands clasped behind him. The prosecution will throw numbers at you, twist words, and parade bitter ex-employees as witnesses. But intent matters, and they can't show it. Kevin McCarthy is a victim of politics, not a criminal, and you'll see that by the end of this trial. The opening salvos set the stage. Evidence versus reputation, corruption versus conspiracy. The courtroom hummed as reporters tapped out live updates. The hashtag McCarthy trial surging online. Opinions split. Some saw McCarthy as a martyr of partisan warfare, others as a fallen king finally caught. Lopez called her first witness, Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic accountant with a knack for untangling financial webs. Torres, a wiry man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses, took the stand, a thick binder of records in hand. Dr. Torres, Lopez began, holding up a stack of bank statements. What do these documents reveal? Torres adjusted his glasses and spoke evenly. They show $3 million transferred from Kern Energy Solutions to a shell company, Valley Futures LLC, over 18 months. The funds were labeled consulting fees, but Valley Futures then redirected the money to accounts tied to McCarthy's campaign and personal assets, a jet lease, a vacation home in Tahoe, luxury car payments, all linked to his family or close associates. The gallery murmured, a ripple of shock spreading. Lopez pressed on. Could this be a mistake? No, Torres said. The transactions were structured to evade reporting requirements. It's a deliberate pattern, not an accident. Hayes rose for cross-examination, his tone casual but pointed. Dr. Torres, campaign finance is messy, right? It can be, Torres admitted. And couldn't someone else say, a staffer have set this up without Mr. McCarthy's knowledge? It's possible, Torres said, but the beneficiaries suggest he was informed. Hayes smirked at the jury. Suggest, not confirm. No proof, Mr. McCarthy signed off. Not directly in these records, Torres replied. No further questions, Hayes said, sowing doubt as he sat. Next, Lopez called Jessica Klein, a former McCarthy aide turned whistleblower. Klein, a nervous woman in her 30s with short brown hair, took the stand, her hands fidgeting as she swore in. MS. Klein, Lopez asked, what did you witness working for Mr. McCarthy? Klein swallowed hard. I was his deputy scheduler in 2022. I overheard him in a meeting with Kern Energy execs. He said, give me the funds, and I'll push the contract through. He told us to keep it quiet, no paper trail. The room buzzed. Lopez leaned in. He knew it was off the books? Yes, Klein said, her voice firming. He laughed about its aid. They'll never catch us. Hayes pounced during cross-examination. MS. Klein, you were fired, weren't you? Yes, she admitted, flushing. For poor performance? For pushing back on sketchy meetings, she countered. So this is payback? Hayes asked, turning to the jury. No, it's the truth, Klein insisted, her eyes flashing. As the first day closed, the jury sat divided. Lopez's evidence was compelling, but Hayes' doubts lingered. McCarthy remained stoic, but the cracks in his armor were beginning to show, setting the stage for Judge Martinez's explosive role to come. The second day of Kevin McCarthy's trial dawned with a restless energy enveloping room 3 of the Bakersfield federal courthouse. The Central Valley sun filtered through the high windows, casting stark shadows across the packed gallery. Reporters typed furiously, their live updates fueling the growing storm on social media, while spectators whispered predictions, their voices a low hum beneath the creak of wooden benches. Prosecutor Sandra Lopez stood at her table, her dark suit a sharp contrast to the stack of binders beside her, ready to tighten the noose with a trio of witnesses whose testimonies could dismantle McCarthy's defense. First to take the stand was Dr. Michael Torres, the forensic accountant whose financial expertise had already stirred unease. Torres settled into the witness chair, his wire-rimmed glasses glinting as he opened his binder of records. Dr. Torres, Lopez began, holding up a highlighted bank statement. You've traced $3 million from Kern Energy Solutions to Valley Futures, LLC. Can you elaborate on what happened to that money? Torres nodded, his voice measured. The funds were transferred in increments over 18 months, labeled as consulting fees. Valley Futures then redirected them into several streams. $1.2 million leased a private jet used by McCarthy's family. $100,000 bought a vacation home in Lake Tahoe under a trust linked to his wife, and the rest funded luxury purchases, cars, jewelry, all tied to his inner circle. The gallery buzzed, a ripple of shock spreading through the crowd. Lopez pressed further. In your expert opinion, could this be an administrative error? No, Torres said firmly. The transactions were structured to avoid detection, split into smaller amounts, routed through a shell company. It's intentional, not accidental. Richard Hayes, McCarthy's defense attorney, rose for cross-examination, his tone casual but edged with doubt. Dr. Torres, you're assuming intent. Couldn't a staffer have mismanaged this without Mr. McCarthy's knowledge? It's possible, Torres admitted, but the beneficiary's his family, his allies suggest he was aware. Hayes smirked at the jury. Suggest, not prove. No evidence, Mr. McCarthy personally authorized these. Not in these specific records, Torres conceded. No further questions, Hayes said, planting a seed of uncertainty as he sat. Next, Lopez called Jessica Klein, the former aide whose insider account had hinted at McCarthy's involvement. Klein took the stand, her short brown hair framing a face tight with nerves, her hands clasped tightly as she faced the room. MS. Klein, Lopez asked, you overheard Mr. McCarthy discuss Kern Energy Solutions. What did he say? Klein swallowed hard, her voice trembling at first but steadying. It was June 2022 in his D.C. office. I was scheduling a meeting with Kern Energy execs. He told them, give me the funds and I'll push the contracts through. Later, he told me and another aide to keep it quiet, no paper trail. The courtroom hummed with tension. Lopez leaned in. Did he indicate he knew it was improper? Yes, Klein said, her voice firming. He laughed and said, they'll never catch us. It wasn't a joke to me. Gasps punctuated the air. Lopez nodded. No further questions. Hayes stood, his eyes narrowing. MS. Klein, you were fired from McCarthy's team, right? Yes, she admitted, her cheeks flushing. For poor performance? For questioning shady deals, she countered, her voice rising. So this is personal, Hayes said, turning to the jury. A disgruntled ex-employee with a vendetta? I'm here because it's right, Klein insisted, her gaze defiant. Hayes sat, leaving the jury to weigh her credibility. Lopez had one more witness to unleash, Robert Salazar, a late addition whose name sent a jolt through the room. Salazar, a former Kern Energy Solutions lobbyist, stepped forward, a stocky man in his 50s with a weathered face and a hesitant stride. Mr. Salazar, Lopez began gently. Why are you testifying today? Salazar rubbed his hands together, his voice low. I was part of the deal with McCarthy. I couldn't sleep knowing what we did. The room stilled. What deal? Lopez pressed. In 2021, I met McCarthy at a fundraiser, Salazar said. He promised to lean on federal agencies for our drilling permits, if we funneled $3 million through Valley Futures. He said it'd help his campaign and keep things comfortable for him. A stunned silence fell. Lopez held up a small recorder. Do you have proof? Yes, Salazar said, nodding. I taped a follow-up call. I kept it in case I needed leverage. Hayes shot up. Objection. This recording's legality is questionable. Judge Martinez's voice sliced through. Overruled. Play it. Lopez pressed play, and McCarthy's voice crackled through. Push the funds through Valley Futures $3 million keeps us all comfortable. I'll handle the permits. Salazar's voice followed. That's risky, Kevin. McCarthy chuckled. Not with my pull. Chaos erupted. Reporters scribbled. Spectators gasped. And McCarthy's face tightened, though he remained still, his hands clenching the table. Lopez faced the jury. No further questions. Hayes tried to discredit Salazar, questioning his motives and suggesting coercion. But the jury's eyes lingered on McCarthy, whose stoic mask was beginning to crack. As Salazar stepped down, the trial's tide had turned, setting the stage for Martinez's explosive role. The third day opened with Room 3 simmering with anticipation. Robert Salazar's recording had shifted the trial's momentum, and now Kevin McCarthy would take the stand to reclaim his narrative. Richard Hayes had spent the night drilling him, crafting a defense rooted in his decades of public service. As McCarthy rose, the courtroom hushed, every eye on the former House Speaker. He strode to the witness box, his navy suit crisp, his sandy hair combed neatly. He swore the oath and sat, his hands clasped, projecting the calm authority that had once carried him to the top of Congress. Hayes approached, his tone warm and deferential. Mr. McCarthy, did you knowingly misuse your influence for Kern Energy Solutions? No, McCarthy said, his voice steady, meeting the jury's gaze. I've served this district for nearly 20 years, fighting for jobs and families. I trusted my team to handle campaign details, and I had no part in any illegal deals. What about the recording? Hayes prompted. It's twisted, McCarthy replied smoothly. I was discussing lawful support campaign contributions within bounds. My words were about strategy, not corruption. You deny all wrongdoing? Completely, he said, his tone firm. I delegated, not dictated. Hayes nodded, satisfied, and sat. Sandra Lopez rose, her eyes sharp with intent, clutching a folder of emails and transcripts. Mr. McCarthy, she began, you say you delegated. But here's an email you sent. Kern's on board, keep it quiet. Explain that. McCarthy blinked, then recovered. I meant quiet in terms of publicity, not illegality. Lopez arched a brow. Really? Another email. Permits are set, expect their payment. That's you tying favors to funds, isn't it? No, McCarthy said, his voice tightening. It was coordination, not a quid pro quo. Lopez held up the recording transcript. You said, $3 million keeps us comfortable. That's personal gain, not campaign strategy. I misspoke, McCarthy said, his calm fraying. I meant it'd support our efforts. Misspoke. Lopez pressed. Your lobbyist warned it was risky, and you said, not with my pull. That's not delegation, that's control. I trusted my team, McCarthy insisted, his tone rising. To break the law? Lopez shot back, producing a lease agreement. A jet for your family, paid by Valley Futures. You didn't know? It's not mine, McCarthy snapped. I don't control those accounts. But you used it, Lopez said, turning to the jury. Service doesn't explain this. Hayes objected, speculation, and Martinez sustained it, but the jury's faces showed doubt creeping in. Lopez kept the pressure on, dismantling McCarthy's story piece by piece. By the end, he stepped down, his confidence shaken, sweat beading on his brow. The room buzzed with whispers, and Judge Martinez watched, her sharp eyes hinting at the storm she was about to unleash. The fourth day of Kevin McCarthy's trial arrived with Room 3 of the Bakersfield Federal Courthouse, cloaked in a palpable tension. The air felt heavy, laden with the scent of polished wood and the nervous energy of a gallery stretched to its limits. Reporters typed furiously, their live feeds amplifying the stakes to a national audience, while spectators sat on edge, sensing the trial teetering toward a breaking point. Prosecutor Sandra Lopez stood at her table, her dark eyes gleaming with purpose, ready to deliver a blow that could shatter McCarthy's defense. The previous day's testimony had rocked the courtroom, but what came next would tip the scales irrevocably. Lopez rose, her voice cutting through the hum of anticipation. The prosecution calls Robert Salazar to the stand. A ripple of shock spread through the room as Robert Salazar stepped forward, a stocky man in his 50s, his weathered face etched with unease, his suit slightly rumpled from the weight of his decision to testify. As a former lobbyist for Kern Energy Solutions, Salazar had been a shadow figure in the case until now. He took the stand, his hands trembling as he swore the oath, his gaze avoiding McCarthy, who sat rigid at the defense table, his jaw clenched tight. "Mr. Salazar," Lopez began, her tone steady but probing, "what was your role at Kern Energy Solutions?" "I was a senior lobbyist," Salazar replied, his voice low but clear. "I handled government relations, securing contracts, navigating regulations." "And did that include dealings with Kevin McCarthy?" Salazar nodded, his eyes dropping briefly. "Yes. In early 2021, I met with him at a private dinner in Bakersfield. He offered to push federal drilling permits for Kern Energy if we funneled $3 million through Valley Futures LLC to his campaign and personal accounts." The courtroom stilled, every breath held. Lopez pressed on. "Did he know this was illegal?" "He didn't spell it out," Salazar said, "but he said, 'Keep it off the books, no one needs to know.' He knew it wasn't clean." Gasps punctuated the silence. Lopez held up a small black recorder, its presence sending a jolt through the room. "Do you have evidence of this?" "Yes," Salazar said, his voice trembling slightly. "I recorded a follow-up call with McCarthy. I kept it as insurance." Richard Hayes, McCarthy's defense attorney, shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This recording's admissibility is dubious privacy violations and lack of authentication." Judge Elena Martinez leaned forward, her dark eyes narrowing like a predator sizing up prey. "I'll decide that, Mr. Hayes." "Overruled. Play it, MS." Lopez pressed play, and McCarthy's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but unmistakable. "Push the funds through Valley Futures, $3 million, keeps us all comfortable. I'll handle the permits." Salazar's voice followed, cautious. "That's risky, Kevin." McCarthy chuckled, a low, confident sound. "Not with my pull. Just make it happen." Chaos erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically, their pens a blur, while spectators gasped and whispered in disbelief. McCarthy's face tightened, his hands gripping the table's edge, knuckles whitening as the weight of his own words crashed down. His blue eyes darted to Hayes, who whispered urgently, but McCarthy seemed frozen, his breath shallow and rapid. Lopez turned to the jury, her voice rising over the din. "This isn't hearsay. This is Kevin McCarthy, caught on tape, orchestrating a corrupt deal for personal gain. No further questions." Hayes stood for cross-examination, his composure fraying at the edges. "Mr. Salazar, you're facing your own legal troubles, aren't you? This is a deal to save yourself, isn't it?" "I came forward on my own," Salazar countered, his voice steadying. "I don't expect to deal just the truth." "You could have tampered with this recording," Hayes pressed. "Why should we trust you?" "It's unedited," Salazar said. "I've got the original file, time-stamped." Hayes hammered at Salazar's credibility, his past lobbying scandals, his motives, but the jury's eyes remained fixed on McCarthy, whose rigid posture and flickering gaze betrayed more than any rebuttal could. As Salazar stepped down, the trial's momentum had shifted decisively, the recording a smoking gun that left McCarthy's defense reeling. Judge Martinez watched, her sharp features unreadable, but her silence a storm brewing, ready to unleash. The fifth day of the trial crackled with an almost unbearable tension in Room 3. Robert Salazar's recording had blown the case wide open, and the defense scrambled to salvage McCarthy's image with a parade of character witnesses, local business owners, former staffers who vouched for his integrity. But the jury's faces showed growing doubt, their trust eroded by the damning audio. Then, in a move that stunned the room, Judge Elena Martinez took the reins. "Mr. McCarthy," she said, her voice slicing through the murmurs like a whip, "I'll question you myself." A hush fell as McCarthy rose, his movements slow and deliberate, his tailored suit suddenly seeming too large for his frame. He returned to the witness stand, his sandy hair catching the light, his hands clasped tightly as he faced Martinez, whose dark eyes bore into him with unrelenting intensity. "Mr. McCarthy," Martinez began, her tone crisp and cutting, "you've claimed you trusted your team, that you didn't know about this deal with Kern Energy Solutions. But that recording says otherwise. Explain your statement. $3 million keeps us all comfortable." McCarthy cleared his throat, his voice steady but strained. "Your Honor, it was taken out of context. I was discussing campaign, support legal contributions. Comfortable meant our political efforts, not personal gain." Martinez's eyes narrowed, her voice sharpening. "Legal contributions?" He said, "Off the books. That's not legal, it's a cover-up." "Try again." McCarthy shifted uncomfortably. "I misspoke. I meant it to be discreet, not hidden." "Discreet," Martinez snapped, leaning forward. $3 million flowed to a jet, a vacation home, your cronies' accounts all, while you pulled strings for Kern Energy. You expect this court to believe you're a naive bystander. "I delegated those details," McCarthy said, his tone rising slightly. "I didn't oversee every transaction." "Delegated?" Martinez shot back, her voice rising with incredulity. "You're not some clueless rookie, Mr. McCarthy, a seasoned politician who ran the House. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you hid it behind a smile and a handshake." Hayes stood. "Objection. She's badgering the witness." "Sit down, Mr. Hayes," Martinez barked, her gaze never leaving McCarthy. "I'm not done." McCarthy's hands trembled. "I didn't intend to break the law," he said, his calm fraying. "My focus was serving my district." Martinez's voice turned venomous, her words a lash that echoed through the room. "Serving your district? You serve yourself, you greedy, spineless fraud. You traded your office for a jet and a lake house, then strutted around like some noble leader. You're a disgracious petty crook in a fancy suit who thought his pull made him untouchable." The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath, as Martinez's insult landed like a thunderbolt. McCarthy's face flushed red, then drained to a sickly pale, his eyes widening in shock. His mouth opened, but no words came, his breath hitching as the weight of her words crushed his composure. The jury stared, riveted, while reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every syllable of Martinez's scathing rebuke. "Step down," Martinez said curtly, her tone final, her dark eyes blazing with contempt. McCarthy stumbled back to his seat, his legs unsteady, his hands shaking as he sank into the chair. The gallery buzzed, a frenetic hum of shock and excitement. But McCarthy remained silent, his pale face a mask of defeat. Then, in a voice barely audible over the chaos, he muttered to Hayes, "I'm done. Tell them I resign everything." Hayes blinked, stunned. "Kevin, what?" "Everything," McCarthy repeated, his voice breaking. "Congress, the party, all of it. I'm out." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, spectators murmured in disbelief, and Lopez sat back, her eyes wide with surprise. Martinez banged her gavel, her voice rising. "Order, order in this court." But the damage was done. McCarthy's resignation, forced by the sting of Martinez's insult and the weight of the evidence, sent shockwaves through the room, a political career collapsing in real time before their eyes. The sixth day of Kevin McCarthy's trial dawned with room 3 of the Bakersfield federal courthouse, steeped in a tense, almost surreal silence. The gallery was packed to bursting, the air thick with a mingled sense of coffee, ink, and anticipation. Reporters sat poised, their laptops glowing with half-written stories, while spectators leaned forward, Their whispers a low hum beneath the creak of the wooden benches. At the defense table, McCarthy sat slumped, his navy suit wrinkled, his sandy hair disheveled, stark contrast to the polished figure he'd cut days earlier. His face, still pale from Judge Martinez's scathing insult, bore the weight of a man who'd seen his world unravel. Richard Hayes, his attorney, hovered beside him, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation after McCarthy's whispered order to resign. The double doors swung open, and the jury filed in, their faces grim and weary after 4 hours of deliberation. Judge Elena Martinez entered moments later, her black robe crisp against her gray-streaked hair, her dark eyes sharp as she took her seat. The room fell silent, every eye on her as she adjusted her glasses and addressed the jury. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" she asked, her voice steady and commanding, cutting through the stillness like a blade. The foreman, a wiry woman in her 40s with a farmer's weathered hands, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "Proceed," Martinez said, her posture rigid, her gaze unwavering. The foreman unfolded a slip of paper, her voice clear but heavy. "On the charge of misuse of congressional influence and conspiracy to accept illicit funds, we find the defendant, Kevin McCarthy, guilty." A collective gasp tore through the courtroom, followed by a surge of noise reporters typing frantically, spectators murmuring in disbelief. McCarthy's pale face crumpled, his hands clenching the table as his shoulders sagged, the verdict a final blow to his already shattered resolve. Hayes placed a hand on his arm, but McCarthy barely flinched, his eyes fixed on the floor, his breath shallow and ragged. Martinez raised her gavel, her voice rising over the chaos. "Order," she barked, the sharp crack of wood on wood silencing the room. "Mr. McCarthy, do you have anything to say before sentencing?" The gallery held its breath, every eye turning to the former House Speaker. McCarthy rose slowly, his movements unsteady, his suit hanging loose on his frame. He faced Martinez, his pale face glistening with sweat, his lips trembling as he opened his mouth to speak. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as all awaited his response, perhaps a plea, a defense, or a final stand from the man who'd once wielded immense power. Instead, in a voice so soft it barely carried beyond the front row, he whispered, "I'm sorry I let everyone down." His head bowed, his hands fell to his sides, and he sank back into his chair, the admission a quiet surrender that stunned the room. Then, louder, he turned to Hayes and said, "Make it official, I resign from Congress, from everything, right now." The courtroom exploded, reporters shouted questions, spectators gasped, and even the jury exchanged wide-eyed glances. Hayes stammered, "Kevin, you already said," but McCarthy cut him off, his voice breaking. "Do it. I'm done." Sandra Lopez, the prosecutor, sat back, her eyes widening in surprise, while Hayes scrambled to draft a statement. Martinez banged her gavel again, her voice piercing the chaos. "Order. Order in this court." The room stilled, but McCarthy's resignation, forced by the sting of her insult and the crushing weight of the guilty verdict, hung in the air like a thunderclap. Martinez's dark eyes bore into McCarthy, her expression a mix of disdain and finality. "Court is adjourned," she said, her gavel falling once more. "Sentencing will be scheduled in 2 weeks." She rose and exited, leaving the room in a frenzy as McCarthy remained seated, his pale face a mask of defeat, his whispered apology and resignation echoing in the stunned silence that followed. In the days that followed, the Bakersfield federal courthouse returned to its quiet routine, but the echoes of Kevin McCarthy's trial reverberated far beyond its concrete walls. News vans lingered outside, their cameras capturing the building that had become a symbol of political reckoning, while inside Room 3, the air still seemed to carry the weight of McCarthy's collapse. His whispered resignation, forced in the wake of Judge Martinez's blistering insult and the guilty verdict, had transformed the trial into a national spectacle, a moment etched into the annals of American politics. Headlines blazed across every outlet. "McCarthy guilty," resigns in courtroom shocker after judge's rebuke. The hashtag McCarthy resigns trended worldwide within hours, igniting a firestorm of reaction online. Cable news panels dissected the trial late into the night, pundits clashing over McCarthy's downfall. Some lamented the end of a career that had once promised so much, calling his resignation a tragic capitulation under pressure. Others celebrated it as a rare victory for accountability, a crack in the facade of political invincibility. On X, the divide was stark. He took responsibility, give him, that one user posted, while another retorted, "Too late, crook got caught." The secondary players grappled with their own fallout. Jessica Klein, the ex-aide whose testimony had exposed McCarthy's dealings, retreated to a quiet coffee shop in Bakersfield, avoiding the press. "I didn't want him ruined," she told a local reporter, "but he left me no choice." Robert Salazar, the lobbyist whose recording had sealed McCarthy's fate, vanished from public view, rumored to be negotiating a plea deal of his own. Richard Hayes issued a terse statement. Mr. McCarthy accepts the verdict and his decision to resign. We'll prepare for sentencing. But his clipped tone betrayed a frustration with a client who'd crumbled under Martinez's assault. Judge Elena Martinez returned to her chambers, her fiery demeanor unchanged. Her insult, a greedy, spineless fraud in a fancy suit, became a rallying cry for those demanding reform, cementing her legacy as a judicial force who toppled a titan with words alone. Colleagues whispered that the McCarthy case would define her tenure, a testament to her refusal to bow to power, even as critics accused her of overstepping with her courtroom outburst. Martinez remained silent, letting her ruling in McCarthy's resignation speak for itself. The broader impact rippled outward like a shockwave. McCarthy's conviction sparked investigations into congressional influence peddling, with Kern Energy Solutions and Valley Futures LLC becoming symbols of corruption. His once loyal base fractured. Some mourned the loss of a Central Valley champion. Others distanced themselves, eager to escape the scandal's taint. The private jet, the Tahoe vacation home, and the $3 million deal were dissected in exposés and late-night monologues, turning McCarthy from a political kingmaker into a cautionary tale. McCarthy himself disappeared from the public eye. Rumors swirled off a retreat to his Bakersfield home, of late-night calls to family, of a life stripped bare of the power that had once defined him. No interviews, no press conferences, just silence. His resignation, delivered in that breathless courtroom moment after Martinez's insult, marked the end of a decades-long career, a fall as swift as it was stunning. A week later, outside the courthouse, a lone protester held a sign. Martinez, 1, corruption, 0. Nearby, a young reporter named Maria Delgado, who'd covered the trial for a local outlet, filed her final story. Judge Martinez didn't just insult Kevin McCarthy, she wrote. She exposed a rot in power itself. His resignation quiet, broken, and forced left us all questioning who we trust to lead. The story closed with a nation transfixed, a courtroom emptied, and a legacy reshaped. McCarthy's fall, sparked by Martinez's fiery words and cemented by his own surrender, had not only ended the trial but carved a new chapter in the Central Valley and beyond, a tale of justice, disgrace, and the power of a judge unafraid to speak truth to power.